Welcome to Urbanist Outdoors, and today we're covering true crime. Well, we're not. We're talking about the removal of bike lanes, but some might consider that a crime. Specifically, we'll be talking about the Bloor Street, Young Street, and University Avenue segregated cycle lanes, which face the threat of removal mere years after they were first installed. So how did a dozen or so miles of cycle lanes become a worldwide story and a mini crisis for the Canadian government structure? Let's find out. The story of the Toronto cycle lanes is pretty interesting, not only from a transport perspective, but also a political perspective. Well, it's interesting as long as you find transport politics interesting, and I'm sure many people don't. But let's assume you do. From the political issues facing the cycle lanes, you first have to understand the Canadian political system, and who has what powers for transport. Canada has three levels of government: federal government, provincial government, and municipal government. Federal is the highest level of government and deals with matters impacting the whole country, such as federal tax, law, defence, and foreign policy. The next level is provincial government, in this case the Ontario provincial government, which deals with education, healthcare, the environment, agriculture, and highways. Finally, there is municipal government, which is local government similar to councils in the UK. Municipal government, in this case Toronto City Council, is responsible for parks, libraries, social services, local police, fire, bins, and public transport. Interestingly, all three governments are currently controlled by different political organisations. This might help explain how political clashes can arise. The national government is currently run by the left-leaning Mark Carney's Liberal Party. This party has been in power in Canada since 2015. At a provincial level, the right-leaning Progressive Conservatives are in charge and have been since 2018. And just to be different, the municipal level in Ontario generally doesn't have party affiliations, so the city is ruled by independent councillors. In terms of transport responsibilities, all three levels of government have some control. Federal government has exclusive authority over international airports, ports, and rail corridors. Provincial government control intra-provincial infrastructure such as intercity highways and roads. It's also responsible for longer distance transport that serves multiple cities within a wider area. For example, Go Transit in Ontario, which operates express buses and commuter rail services. Municipal governments are generally responsible for public transit, city highways, local roads, and public rights-of-way such as sidewalks and bikeways. For example, approximately 70% of all sidewalks in Canada are owned by urban municipalities, along with at least 12,000 kilometres of cycle routes and bikeways. While walking and cycling is mainly the responsibility of the municipal government, the other levels of government have input into active travel through strategies, frameworks and design guides. For example, the federal government launched the National Active Transport Strategy in 2021. The strategy aims to create an inclusive active transport system in Canada and highlights how active transport can improve health outcomes, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and promote vibrant, equitable, and livable communities. At a provincial level, the Ontario Traffic Manual provides design standards for cycling facilities in Ontario. This was updated in 2021. The guidance states how cycle lanes should generally be segregated from traffic, and that the cycle network should be accessible to all, including children over the age of 12. But it also states that practitioners should recognise that it may not be possible or practical to design all cycling facilities to an all ages and abilities standard, and a lot of the guidance is only recommended rather than compulsory. This helpful diagram from the Ontario Traffic Manual shows that once vehicle speeds and volumes are over 50 km an hour and 8,000 vehicles per day, cyclists should be physically separated from cars. Again, this is only a recommendation, so it doesn't have to be followed in every situation. This potentially leaves cycle lane segregation open to challenge. Still, guidance from both the national government and the provincial government provides a consistent message that cycle networks should be designed for all. So what's the issue with the Toronto cycle lanes? Well, it comes down to one man, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario. In 2024, Doug decided that he wanted to improve traffic speeds and reduce congestion. He decided that the best way to do this was to remove cycle lanes, starting with three in particular: Bloor Street, Young Street, and University Avenue. These streets may or may not be on Doug Ford's commute between his constituency and office on Queen's Park Crescent, although I'm sure that's completely unrelated to this decision. One thing I will say about Doug is that he doesn't look like a man who enjoys cycling on a regular basis, so he's probably not getting much personal gain out of these cycle lanes. Also, my dyslexic mind kept spelling his name with a H, making him Doe Ford. I think that's a Freudian slip. Anyway, after Premier Ford decided the bike lanes needed to be removed, a bill was quickly introduced in October 2024 with the snappy name of Reducing Gridlock, Saving You Time Act. Great. Who doesn't like saving time? I assume the name Making Children and Other Vulnerable Users Less Safe didn't make it through the initial brainstorming session. The bill was then passed shortly afterwards in November. Justifying the legislation, Ontario Transport Minister Prabmeet Zakaria said that the city's approach to installing bike lanes was failed and that removing the lanes would free up some of Toronto's most important roads. The Transport Minister also stated that only 1.2% of commuter journeys are made by bike. This has been challenged as some areas served by cycle lane have bike modal shares closer to 10% for commuting. In February 2025, Doug Ford was re-elected after calling a snap election. After re-election, Ford said that there is a clear mandate for cycle lane removal. This supposedly clear mandate is less clear on a map. Yes, Ford won the most districts, as well as the popular vote, and he was re-elected comfortably in his own district. But the whole extent of the cycle lanes that are proposed for removal lie in districts won by the opposition parties. Those areas are shown in orange on this map. Ford's mandate mainly comes from more rural areas, with some being as far away as Thunder Bay, which is a 2-hour flight from Toronto. I personally think it's difficult to argue that residents in a city 1,000 kilometres away care significantly about cycle lanes in Toronto. Never mind that they should be allowed to influence the decisions that impact local roads and communities in the city of Toronto. But hey, we all have different political beliefs. In March 2025, cycle advocacy group Cycle Toronto launched a legal challenge against the planned removals, and in April 2025, a temporary injunction was granted to prevent the removal of the free cycle lanes. Lawyers argued Ontario's irrational and dangerous bid to remove the free bike lanes should be ruled unconstitutional, after the province's own internal advice and experts suggested the move would not accomplish its stated goals to ease congestion. In May 2025, the Ford government appealed against this injunction, but this was rejected by the court in July 2025. This court ruling has been seen as controversial and potentially an overreach of the judiciary, further adding to the political and constitutional chaos that the cycle lanes have caused. Essentially, the court ruled that the removal of the bike lanes was considered to contradict the guarantee of the right to life, liberty, and security. Some legal professionals have argued that this constitutionalizes the right to a bike lane. Ford has since said he intends to fight the ruling and has submitted a further appeal. This highlights how the debate on the removal of the cycle lanes is ongoing, particularly on the legal side. However, from a transport planning perspective, it's hard to argue the bike lanes weren't implemented in the correct manner and can't be considered a success. The cycle lanes were installed by the municipal government in phases, with the first section being installed in 2016 on Bloor Street, in the form of a pilot project from Avenue Road to Shore Street. This pilot project was monitored by transport planners, with data collection finding that the bike lanes reduced the proportion of cyclists on sidewalks from 10% to 2 to 5%, reducing conflict and increasing safety for pedestrians. A report analysing the data also found that cycling volumes increased by 49%, from 3,300 riders in June 2016 to 4,900 in June 2017. Around a quarter of this increase was people diverting from neighbouring roads. This provides further safety benefits as cyclists divert from roads without protected cycle lanes to a road with protected cycle lanes. Less cyclists on these neighbouring roads can improve journey times and reduce conflict for motorists. This highlights that there are benefits to cycle lanes for non-cycling road users. Surveying found that on Bloor Street, 66% of motorists felt more comfortable driving next to people cycling, and 86% of pedestrians felt their experiences of using Bloor Street was the same or better after the installation of the cycle lanes. Additionally, there was found to be no increase in collisions between cyclists and motor vehicles, despite the increase in the number of cyclists using Bloor Street, and collisions between motor vehicles was found to have decreased. This may be due to the fact that the road layout was simplified, and that a narrower road means that generally there are lower traffic speeds. The pilot review also highlighted negative impacts of the cycle lane installation. For example, Journey times were increased on Bloor Street for cars. The impact on journey times was reduced by changing signal timing, but it still meant an increase of 2 to 4 minutes in journey times at peak times. The majority of non-cycling car drivers and business owners were also against the trial, but no impact on Bloor Street customer spending was found during the review. So while there were clear benefits to the trial scheme, there were also small negative impacts to car users, and the scheme was not positively received by all. So Doug Ford does have a point that there was an impact on traffic speed and that there are people against the cycle lanes installation. Nonetheless, these results were considered positive enough to make the Shore Street to Avenue Road section permanent and for further sections of the cycle lane to be installed. In 2020, the cycle lanes were extended along University Avenue. 2021 saw an extension along Yonge Street. In 2022, there was a small extension towards Union Station along University Avenue, and in 2023, a further extension westwards along Bloor Street. Final extension on Bloor Street to the Islington area was completed in 2024, with another small extension along University Avenue also completed. Additionally, during this period, small sections of the cycle lane on Bloor have been upgraded from light 1 segregation, similar to this, to more visually pleasing curb-separated cycle lanes. The Toronto Cycle Network map demonstrates how the cycle lanes have developed from a single scheme into a useful network connecting the main commercial, leisure and employment centres in downtown Toronto. It also highlights how important Bloor Street is to that network. Removing the cycle lanes on Bloor Street and other streets would lead to significant gaps in the cycling network, making other routes less useful. Some routes, particularly in the west of the city, would become effective islands, not really connecting anywhere to anywhere. This point has been put to Doug Ford, who has responded to say that he's not against cycle lanes, but they need to be built on secondary roads rather than main roads like Bloor Street. This brings us nicely to a report that's been prepared for the City of Toronto to consider the removal of the cycle lanes. The headlines are striking. Unsurprisingly, the removal of the cycle lane would be expected to decrease safety for cyclists due to the increased interaction with road vehicles and also pedestrians due to more cyclists using the footway. It may also increase the collision risk for drivers. Removing the cycle lanes is expected to cost $48 million, having cost $27 million originally to install. The removal would also create more delays to cars during reconstruction and have an opportunity cost, as it would require staff and resources that could be used elsewhere on other projects. The report also highlights that further spending may be required to improve cycle lane infrastructure on alternative roads. As Doug Ford has stated that he's not against cycle lanes, but they should be on secondary roads, then it has to be assumed that new cycle routes would be created. And I'm sure Premier Ford, like most politicians, means what he says. Despite Doug Ford's clear enthusiasm for alternative cycle routes, the report points out it's very unlikely that alternative routes can be found, particularly for Bloor Street. Analysis I undertook in GIS shows that the shortest alternative route from Kipling to downtown Toronto is on Dundas Street, which itself is a major road. This alternative route would also be 1 kilometre longer. A potential alternative route on the back streets is possible, but is 2.4 kilometres longer at 14.4 kilometres in total. Clearly, it's not a favourable cycling route either. To be well used, cycle routes need to be direct and coherent, which the alternative backstreet route definitely isn't. I mean, look at this route. 99% of people marching in a pride parade are straighter than this route. To make this alternative route easy to use would require significant investment in signage and road markings for navigation, and even then, people are likely just to choose to either cycle in traffic or on the pavement on Bloor Street. The report covers the difficulty of creating alternative cycle lanes to Bloor Street. For example, the only crossing of the Humber River is Old Mill Road, which requires crossing a narrow historic bridge which doesn't even have footways. There's also no suitable route for crossing the rail lines. It's simply difficult to get around the fact that Bloor Street is surrounded by natural and man-made objects like rivers, rail lines, and the incredibly hilly High Park, all of which make easy-to-use alternative cycle routes difficult to create. It's also questionable if alternative routes would actually serve the retail, community facilities and employment hubs that are present on Bloor Street and University Avenue. After all, Cycle lanes are about connecting people to destinations, so they need to connect into those destinations. The report highlights the large number of people working and living within 250 metres of the cycle lanes. The cycle lanes serve over 100,000 residents and over 200,000 jobs, as well as 41 schools. It's very unlikely that alternative routes will be close enough to serve those residents and employment hubs, not to mention the vulnerable children accessing schools, for which cycle lanes are pivotal for safe cycling. Finally, the removal of the cycle lanes throws into question the coherence of transport policy within Toronto. The city aims to tackle climate change and provide safe bikeways for all ages and abilities, and as a result, a targeted 75% of school and work trips under 5 kilometres to be undertaken by walking, cycling, or public transport. Planning policy has also shifted to encourage active travel, with recently built developments along the corridor having 1.7 times more cycling spaces than car spaces. Developments under consideration are expected to have over 4 times more cycle parking than car parking. Building developments with lots of cycle parking, while simultaneously removing cycle lanes that allow people to bike in a safe and comfortable way, is completely incoherent. So that's the story of Toronto's under-threat cycle lanes. Their future is still uncertain. I can understand some people's anger towards cycle lanes. For example, people have a point that Canadian winters are difficult to bike in. There's also plenty of compelling reasons for the cycle lanes to remain, and they are generally well used. The positive side is that they've not yet been removed, despite the political pressure. Hopefully, they'll never be removed. If you've enjoyed this video, you can see me bike the whole of the Bloor Street and University Avenue cycle routes at this link.